Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Matthew Struck with Sell Like a CPCU, joined as always by my partner in crime, Precious. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. The world isn't totally on fire right now, which is
Not
good.
completely.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet anyway. That's right. That's right. So before we get rolling, for anyone who is new, if you watch this on the record playback or if you do tune in live, this is Sell Like a CPCU, where myself and Precious, CPCUs and some guests, when we're lucky enough to have them, talk about current issues, products, ways to sell better, and to basically do it on a higher level, more kind of professional, educated level within the insurance industry. So we are really lucky to be joined today by Spencer Pollock. Spencer, how are you doing, sir?
Oh, you guys are making me feel blushed. I feel honored to be here with you all. I'm doing well.
Awesome. So Spencer's nice enough to get on with us. And Spencer's your contact, right, Precious?
Yes, I actually was introduced to Spencer by a mutual contact, Deidre Wright. So shout out to Deidre. She's amazing.
She's great. Yeah.
So she connected us and we had a chance to chat and connect. And I was so excited about, the messaging and the wealth of knowledge. So I've already plugged him into several connections and couldn't wait to get him on with us. So awesome. I guess if we could start with that, Spencer, if you don't mind, if you can kind of just share a little bit of your backstory and kind of how you came to be such a proponent of, cyber liability.
Yeah. So I started off at State Farm Staff Council doing a lot of trial work for auto defense, premise liability. I tried about 50 jury trials, 300 bench trials, which is a lot of fun because, as my parents and my family will tell you, I love to get into a fight here and there, not physical, verbal. But a couple years into it, I started really seeing these trend lines shift in the insurance world, especially when looking at cyber. That we were really facing an existential threat and that we've been in this war. And I talked about it on my podcast that we are at war. And I've got a lot of pushback from friends and family being like, oh, that's a little intense. And I'm like, okay, well, they attacked our elections. They're attacking our hospitals. If this is not a war, I'm not sure what is a war, right? It's just because you don't see bodies on the front page. And I'm not trying to be, crude about it, but we are at war.
Absolutely.
And so then I started seeing it like 5 years ago, went to about 2.5 years ago, went to Niles, Barton Wilmer to launch the data security practice and really dive into the cyber liability. And, the insurance world is such a great connection to this because I believe there is a huge lack of awareness when it comes to cyber, when it comes to cyber threats and how we protect ourselves and should we be proactive. And I think cyber insurance and brokers are such a frontline, almost soldier.
Absolutely.
Because your clients that you're speaking to, they already have some level of, appreciation of risk and protecting themselves. But it's then about getting into that conversation to broach saying, hey, let's talk cyber liability. Let's talk why you need the insurance. Let's talk why you need the lawyer, why you need the tech. Here's what we can do for you. And, that's where kind of natural connection, I feel like, was built between that team-centric approach with lawyers, insurance brokers, and tech when it comes to cyber liability.
Now, Spencer, just in terms of like your role within the ecosystem, right? You work for a law firm, but is most of what you're doing advisory? Are you doing kind of like risk management analysis on the front end? Where do you fit into that process?
So it's kind of a 3-tool approach, I say. I call it prepare, adapt, respond. And you'll see I love acronyms. I'm a huge nerd. I'm a very much nerd.
Awesome.
So it comes in the front end. We come in, we do a risk analysis. Obviously not the tech part, but we'll figure out what laws apply to a company based on what information you're taking in, where your past and current employees, clients are located. Then we get you compliant in terms of the written information security policy, incident response plan, all those necessary things to show your clients that you're taking that reasonable approach. And actually to show you the insurer too, because then most likely you'll be able to demonstrate a lower risk, and then lowers the premiums, vendor vetting, vendor contracts, incident response training. I tell my clients, if you have a plan and you practice it and you have a team, you're going to save on average about 1.2 million in a data breach. So we do the annual kind of review too, because as you all know, cyber coverages move very quickly. So do the law. And we do the data breach work too. So we, are called by clients, either private clients or insurance carriers, syndicates who say, we've got a breach. We need you to come in and kind of run point to kind of get everything protected under attorney-client privilege, coordinate parties, and then do that legal deep dive to see if what information was impacted and what laws are going to trigger. Which, let me tell you, it's a fun experience. It's a fun activity that I will welcome anybody who wants to do it with me to pull their hair out.
I think that's a really good point. Whenever we think about insurance, especially on the PNC side, we always think about, how much indemnification will be, right? And so on the property side, especially when it comes to buildings or vehicles, we know roughly, what the estimates are on that. But cyber is one of those things that the costs are really hard to quantify. So pre-breach, pre-incident, what is do you have like a rule of thumb in terms of, is it centered around number of records? Is it something that you should think about in terms of revenue? Or how do you even kind of start down this road of helping someone understand how much of an exposure they have and what's adequate coverage?
Well, so the first thing I talk about with every one of my clients is you need insurance, right? When I first started doing this and really obviously at State Farm, I couldn't do it. I was learning about the privacy office, but I wasn't working with clients yet. When I came to Niles 2.5 years ago and talking to clients, the question, I'd be like, go get insurance. And they'd be like, well, where do I go? And I'd be like, well, let me just Google from here. Because if you don't have insurance, average data breach costs $3.92 million. I mean, the records per record costs, healthcare is at around, I think, 400, financial, I think 220, professional services 180. So, it's the simple question of asking a client, okay, how many records you have? I'm like, well, what do you mean? We don't have records. I'm like, how many emails are in your email box? Well, I don't know. I'm like, well, let's check. So you see that. And then I'm like, all right, here's where I think your risk profile is, right? Here's why I think you're going to be exposed, especially if you don't have insurance or the right coverage. And so then we kind of get that baseline of, okay, well, you've got 200 employees. We know each of your email accounts as X and probably X information. We know you have records on your systems that aren't encrypted. We know that you're exposed between like 100 and 200 vendors, people you work with, and you don't have insurance. So let's get you to a broker, someone like you all who knows what they're doing, somebody who's experienced, or where we can get to I call it unique because I feel like in cyber, you have to have a niche here. Just like in law, insurance, if you don't, it's almost a disservice to the clients we're working with because it goes back to education. So it's figuring out that baseline and then looking for a good fit. That's been a big emphasis for us. It's finding those good fits like you all who are passionate and knowledgeable and, will take care of the clients that we have.
Yeah, that's one thing that typically the way I explain insurance and risk management, because it definitely sounds like what you guys are providing are really that intensive cyber risk management piece that's associated with this. And that really well complements the insurance because the imagery that I use, it's the trapeze act with the safety net, right? The safety net is to make sure that if you do fall, that it's not like, the end, right? Like you don't die. Okay. But the problem is that you can't just continually rely on the safety net. If you're a trapeze act and you continually fall off the high wire, no one's going to want to watch, right? So the risk management is the pole that the high wire act holds to balance themselves. It's the training, it's the harnesses, it's the shoes and things like that end up getting put into it. Here's a question I have for you, Spencer, and I run into this a lot. I think you've probably run into this too, Precious, is you have a conversation with a client and it might not even be like a small mom and pop. It could be like a medium-sized client where they're not really doing a lot of IT in-house. They're using a lot of outside vendors for stuff. And they say, well, you know what? The reason why I don't have to worry about a cyber breach is my exposure in-house is small because all of my records are on the cloud. They're with these other third-party vendors. I'm not going to get hit with, state fines. I'm not going to get hit with all this record stuff. I just have to worry that they have that coverage in place. Do you run into that? Because I think that's like a rampant misconception that they're not going to get hit for it.
It's what you just said, like gets the hair on the back of my neck up because it's every day. I have that conversation of well, wait, what do you mean? I'm not responsible for them. They're responsible for this. And I'm like, wait, no. Let me tell you, the law makes you responsible for these vendors. I give them a great example too. I go back to 2014 with a company called Fazio. Fazio was a small HVAC company in Pennsylvania. They were using online free anti-malware. Problem is they weren't getting real-time security updates. Like, you see on your computer being like, this is updating for Windows to prevent basically when they figure out there's a vulnerability. So lo and behold, phishing attack, click an email, hacker gets in, gets a password, and then gets into a payment portal with one of their, I would say vendors too. That vendor was Target. So that kicked off the Target breach. And what I tell my clients is, A, nobody knows who Fazio is, but everybody knows who Target is.
Absolutely.
And you don't have Target's PR budget to protect yourselves. You just don't. No, and your clients and employees and the government, they don't care that it started with someone else. They care that it was the data that you said that you were going to protect. I look at it as it's legal promises. You're promising to protect this data, and the law says that you have to make sure that you do that due diligence with vendors. So it's cutting through that with clients to get them to fully conceptualize that they have to take ownership. What you said too is very tough, is when you run into a client who outsources cyber and then believes that the cyber company is keeping them compliant when they actually have to keep them compliant. And it's the contractual aspects too, that you have to do these deep dives to make sure the contracts have the reasonable safeguards, notification provisions, data disposal, and liability. When I pull contracts out and show them where the liability is going, where basically vendors have said, well, if something happens, it's not our fault, so you can't sue us. They had no clue that was there. I'm like, well, maybe contracts are contracts, but it's once again, it's such a team approach, and that's why I love bringing in good brokers and good people in insurance who know these coverages, because then it's almost like you need 3 people explaining the same thing to one client to get through to them about this.
Yeah, I think that's a good dynamic. I'm sorry to cut you off, Precious, but I think that's a good point that you brought up. Is you need that like you said, multiple advocates for this, because I think the biggest problem is that people can't wrap their head around that. If you're not an IT firm, you still need this, right?
Absolutely.
You could be a bakery and you still need to pay attention to this, especially with kind of how decentralized processing and data collection has gotten nowadays, and how sophisticated certain operations are. So I'm sorry, I cut you off, Precious.
No. I was going to say, along those same lines, I think part of the confusion when we get to talking about cyber is that I think the average business owner doesn't appreciate the duties owed when you have a breach. They don't know what all goes into it, that you have a responsibility to notify, that you have a responsibility to provide, these restorative, services, the ID, restoration and things like that, all of what, it entails, the PR piece of it. And so, I think also there may be some confusion, and it may exist even at the agent broker level, on where the line is between what your GL responds to, your general liability, versus what the cyber piece, is designed to protect you from, because people just have this notion that, well, I have a general liability policy, I have an excess liability policy, I have X number of dollars in coverage. Why do I need to buy something specific? So Spencer, I don't know if you can kind of talk to that a little bit, and kind of sharing just from a agency awareness perspective, why we need to be pivoting and explaining and offering, cyber in addition to all the other coverages they may already have in place.
That's a really good point with what you just made, and the conversations that I have with clients when I talk to brokers too. And what I say is, look, you're advising your clients about policies. I'm not advising about their policy. But if you're not really explaining this to them, and something comes back, they're going to think it's in their general liability policy, and it's not going to be covered. Maybe ransomware, extortion, business interruption. None of that's going to be there. And I can promise you, they're not going to blame me as an attorney. They're going to turn around. They're going to blame you.
Absolutely.
And it's like, so it's getting to this point of, and I think lawyers are equally suspect to this. Almost, we believe we know more than we do. Right. And it's like, well, we don't need to learn more. We'll just kind of sell on what we have. But it's very short-sighted, I think, from all different angles. And I think brokers have such an opportunity, and brokers and agents and insurers have such an opportunity in this field based on the new regulations coming out and based on the need for the protection. But it's really getting into that ground and pound game, right? It's literally I feel like my life is door to door, right? Going and talking to each individual person and explaining what this is. But the payoff is just huge because it's going to keep getting worse. It's going to keep getting bigger. So the potential line of revenue and business, especially for brokers, I think you guys are in such an amazing position for this, because you get the natural advertising already, right? So people want to talk to you. Nobody wants to talk to a lawyer ever.
Yeah. Wait, I don't know, Spencer. You seem pretty approachable. I don't think you got too much of a problem, but
I've completely fooled you.
Yeah. I love the fact that you brought in like the phrase that came to mind when you were talking about earlier. You brought in the idea that this is evolving really quickly, and that a lot of people are putting kind of assumptions in place that really aren't true. The phrase that comes to mind is it's not just important what you know, it's important to know what you don't know. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there's such a human element to this. This is also what makes this so like freaking unique. It's like there's not like a pending electrical breaker that might short out and catch fire. Mm-hmm. Right. There's literally a human being somewhere else in the world that's either doing it themselves or they're programming a computer or a piece of software to then infiltrate your system and do something bad, whether it be ransomware and holding it for ransom, or just kind of like to shut down your system to watch the world burn. But there's such a human element that even if like all of the known risks you're treating as a risk manager or a broker, there's literally this kind of like innovative aspect to it where an unknown risk might not even exist today. But in 2 days after a hacker comes up with it or a new way of attacking a system, they now find this new way in. So I love that. I love that kind of like imagery where, you basically have to kind of allay your assumptions and almost kind of like know that something's going to happen that you can't anticipate, right? Like there are certain anticipated elements, but there are also these other elements like, I don't know if you've run into this. Have you ever seen one of these where like there's actually a physical hardware attack where it like melts the hardware that's associated with the hacking event? Have you ever seen one of these?
Yeah. Then they'd make the claim under the property. Yeah. Now I haven't seen it go full. I haven't seen it go distant, but I know you're talking about with this.
Yeah. And that's not even something that kind of is like at the top of people's minds, right? They assume if there's property coverage because they're like, oh, well, I have an electronic data processing coverage line, or I have, equipment breakdown that should cover it. And in many cases it doesn't. And so that's a really good point. So let me ask you this. Let's kind of transition into like, we live in a different world today, obviously, than we did December 31st of 2019. Okay. Or even in, January or February. So, in the world of today with COVID, how do you see some of these risks like evolving? Whether some are getting worse, maybe some have actually gotten better, or new risks that have kind of come onto your radar.
So what you talked about with the evolution of these things is so true with this. And with COVID, obviously I truly believe the world changed years ago based on information being the new currency. Hackers, they're insidious, they're sophisticated, but I give them the respect in terms of they know how to stay ahead of us in these threats. So they looked at COVID as a time to leverage our vulnerabilities, because that's really what cyber attacks are. They leverage vulnerabilities, right? They want to get in your systems. They want to steal your information. They want to drain bank accounts. They want to attack elections. And so they looked at COVID as this huge opportunity because, one, to start, everybody's worried, everybody's paranoid. So they did this massive phishing campaign where they're sending out emails from, say, it would look like it's from Hopkins. The heat map, like click here for your stimulus check, click here from the WHO for information about COVID. I mean, these sophisticated emails that look very true. And then the other part that they figured out was that we're all working from home. And then you have the human element where beyond the fact that we're probably not on more secure servers of being at the office, I looked at it as we're all we're out of our routine. So we're less aware, right? When you get up in the morning, you go to work, you get up, get dressed, brush your teeth, get in the car, drive, and then start your day. All right. So it's a nice routine. At home, I hope you're getting dressed and brushing your teeth. But no judgment. So, but in truth, it's probably not. You're not in the car. You don't have that like acclimation. You just kind of sit down at your computer, probably in less formal clothes, and you start clicking. And hackers knew that. And so hackers have been taking advantage of that vulnerability. They've been launching these massive ransomware attacks. Ransomware is basically where they'll be able to gain access through phishing, brute force attacks, spear phishing, and they gain control of your systems. And if you don't have encrypted backups that are able to restore, it's big trouble. So they started with that. So we've seen a huge influx and uptick of ransomware. Last week, the hospitals, I think across the Northeast, got a bulletin from the FBI saying there would be an active cyber attack against major hospitals, the ASAP. And I think it was in New York that they had that experience. So we started seeing those massive upticks where the hackers will be like, look, this is our business model. So pay us and we'll give you your information. We promise we didn't take it. But now we've seen it's like the double where they were taking the information out and then yet they told us, well, no, it's fine. Just pay us. So then they're double dipping. So unfortunately, COVID, just like with everything else in the world, it made it worse. And then in talking to clients and potential clients, the response to these conversations were, well, we just want to survive right now. We don't have the resources or time to pour into cyber. I understand that completely because of how tough this is. But on the other side, I'm like, well, if this happens, you're not going to survive.
So speaking about, again, some of the things that COVID has caused, especially the remote workforce, back in the day, we were in an office. And so if I got a strange email from you and you sat across the aisle from me, I could say, Spencer, what is this? And you would know immediately. Or you'd have a whole department saying, hey, are you guys all noticing this? Did you guys all get this at the same time? And so since we're socially distanced and working remotely, there's that additional exposure where, we just don't have, it's not as convenient to check in with one another, which opens that up. What I've noticed too is that, with everyone working from home, there's a whole lot of emphasis now on, the first thing was, do we just have enough bandwidth on the internet, but companies not using VPNs, so they don't have secure networks. Everyone's just logging in, or even handheld devices. I think that's a big thing now too, is that everyone's trying to, get access to stuff on their cell phones. There's apps for stuff that they used to, back in the day when you had, like you said, a desktop in the office and IT, periodically send a push through, for updates and patches. That's not happening anymore. So what would you recommend in terms of, for those of us who are advising these small businesses that are just trying to maintain operations, right? It's not pretty, but they just needed to keep the doors open. Are there any best practices like pre-loss stuff that you would suggest that a broker go over with their clients?
I would talk to them at a global view, right, rather than the micro view to start. A global view would be, okay, what are you telling your employees about when they're at home, right? How many times are you talking to them about being aware? How up to date are you about the threats that you're facing? I would discuss with them these ransomware attacks and how they start, and I would really stress and emphasize when they're talking to their employees to take a breath before they click on email, right? To maybe look at it more closely, to say, okay, this address looks familiar, but it doesn't. Let me call and make sure, right? We live in a hyper-click world where everything's fast. We just want to click. We want to get through it. But just taking that breath, taking that step back, recognizing you're right. You're not next to somebody in the office. So picking up the phone and calling, basically doing that awareness once a week, even though it's annoying, multiple times a month. For a more policy level, I truly believe that this is the time to look at your policies and to start revamping them, to really understand what you're going to do if there is a data breach, to understand how you're going to deal with it. Because if you think about one of your clients who might have insurance and there's a data breach, but they don't recognize that maybe we need to call the carrier, right? Because it's not like you're in an auto accident and you get the other person's insurance.
Exactly.
Maybe they sit on it for 2 months, 3 months, and all of a sudden, they get calls from their clients being like, we lost our identity. Well, they haven't notified the insurer. Whatever the policy language at that point could be problematic. So it's really getting to the nuts and bolts of how you're going to handle this and getting people accountable within the companies.
Yeah, I think you brought up two really good points there. One was something that I advocate pretty heavily for is like phishing training, right? So the human behavior aspect of things. And I don't know if you guys provide that, through your shop, or if you have partners that do that, but I think that's a big one. Just kind of periodically doing it. And I've actually, pitched this to a couple of business owners. Only a few have taken me up on it, but almost like a bounty system for their employees to report suspicious emails, right? So if you have an email that comes in that looks like it's malicious, have some kind of tote board, or have some way to like give a gift card away or something like that as recognition to people that are, you're trying to keep everyone else protected within the network system. I think the other thing that you're talking about there is something that you probably look at right from the get-go is a post-breach, almost like catastrophe plan, right? And I would imagine, are your clients asking you to put that together, or are you typically kind of like working with the broker to put that together?
So typically we put that together. We work with whoever the client wants to bring in. It is good to interweave the broker to make sure that they're understanding the process as well. But just from the attorney-client privilege and to protect the conversations that are happening, we'll generally just have it with the client where we'll build out the policy or the plan with them, figuring out who needs to be on the team, right? The decision makers, who needs to be the front line, how they determine if you're escalating it to a breach versus just a cyber attack. Because a lot of cyber attacks don't become data breaches, but data breaches always start with a cyber attack. And the big differentiator is the legal part, right? So if you make something a data breach that doesn't need to be, you've now kicked in all the legal liabilities. So it's creating those policies. It's helping them test it. It's making sure they know who to call with their broker. And then beyond that, the broker knows who to call, the carrier, and really get the process moving.
So I will say, with the Matthew, as you were talking about the ecosystem, the attorney obviously has the consultation with the client and identifies the need and writes the prescription, right? Then they come to us and we really kind of fill it via a product and going to a market. Now, prior to specializing in commercial, a lot of this verbiage just reads like Greek, right? And so you can't even kind of wrap your head around it. It's different. To your point, you're afraid to make a misstep, and that may be what the hesitation is, why some brokers maybe don't have the comfort level in pivoting, because it just feels foreign. I know from my past experience that, the underwriters have been extremely helpful for the markets that sell it. And oftentimes they have just very high level brochures, flyers, case scenarios, things like that to kind of help tell the stories that maybe you're not comfortable as a broker to do because you're just trying to get into this space. So shy of a full-blown additional degree or designation, what would you recommend for someone who's trying to gain confidence and knowledge in this area? Are there any just resources just across the board that you would suggest, to kind of, get caught up to speed and be a better asset and resource?
I think what you just said is very true. I think underwriters are a huge resource on this. And I feel like the insurers and the carriers, they want to help educate because obviously it's in their best interest. So, and, brokers have those relationships already set up. So just having, calling someone saying, hey, can you talk to me about this? It's attending, watching these kinds of shows, right? We're talking about kind of obligations and easy things to do. It's doing easy research online, I would suggest to anybody just to go look up data breach notification process. Just if you data breach notification, there we go, process. If you look that up, you'll start seeing common themes within the law, but kind of getting a better idea of the things that clients need to be aware of so they can advise them rather than going to get a certification or another degree. And it's just really reaching out to people in the industry like you two, like me, that can help them, because I feel like all of us, we are big about education. I think all three of us can agree that we love talking about this.
Absolutely.
And it's just about reaching out. I mean, for me, in terms of my development, obviously I've learned from others. I've had great mentors, great people to talk to. So just having those conversations to get that baseline.
Yeah, I think that's really prudent information there in terms of kind of like laying the groundwork and just kind of that iterative process of, if you don't know much, like some is better than zero, obviously. And if you know a little bit to be dangerous, a little bit more is going to be even better. One thing I will say is kind of like a little shameless plug here. The Institutes does offer a course. Actually, they have a host of courses on cyber liability right now. And so through their training program, you don't necessarily have to get like a full-blown designation in it, but they have a number of them. And kind of this might even kind of hash over some of the stuff that we're covering today. But they have a COVID cyber liability risk session that they have available on there. There's a couple other that goes over products and things like that. So that is an option for anyone if you're looking online for like official training courses. But so that being said, I kind of want to ask you like a little bit more of like a how should I put it, like a philosophical question. All right. The things that get the most press are obviously the big data breaches with the big companies, but the bulk of the claims are actually kind of smaller claims throughout the industry. And so a lot of those are kind of like ransomware type claims. And like the phrase "we don't negotiate with terrorists" kind of comes to mind.
Yeah.
Where do you kind of stand on that spectrum? Because I mean, my thought process is if you positively incentivize the behavior, you're going to continue to get more of the behavior. But is it just something where we don't have another alternative, where we just have to get those businesses back to work as quickly as possible and kind of throw some blood money at the situation to get that done?
Well, it's a really good point. And it's definitely a catch-22. And the U.S. Department of Treasury actually just came out with guidance, I think 2 weeks ago, basically saying, we know you all are paying ransomware out. You need to make sure you're not paying it to terrorists. If you do pay terrorists, i.e. people on like the block list, restricted people, if you think about like the Russian hackers, Evil Corp, Wasted Locker, that they will come after the company. So it's about doing a lot of due diligence with that. Which puts
that's tough though, right? Because I don't think people understand how sophisticated the marketplace for hacking services is. There's essentially places on the dark web that are essentially hacking for hire services, right? So the individual who hacks you might just be like a hired gun for a terrorist organization, right? I mean, how do you even vet that?
So there's basically due diligence you can do to see if, like, say, an organization falls within these categories, right? So I don't know, with North Korea, right? They're on probably the sanctions list. And so the company that you're working with, usually it's a forensic company that you'll bring in who will do the negotiation, with the attorney that's there, and they'll do the due diligence and figure out, they basically check this list to make sure they're not on it. But you're right. It's tough. It's very much a catch-22 for the companies that don't have those backups secured and that can restore their systems, because it's the question of, all right, so what, are we just going to lose everything now?
But even with backups and restoration, I mean, on a much simpler level, I remember like with my phone, right? I had an issue with my phone and I had to go back to like a backup, and you'd be surprised, like in a short amount of time, how much has changed. I'm like, oh, all these contacts that I added, these contacts I deleted, and even with a cell phone, how frustrating that is. I mean, you multiply that by a company that has accounts receivables, and so all of a sudden, you try to work from a backup, and the issue that a lot of companies run into is, yes, they may be able to kind of reboot off of a backup, but they still don't know who's gotten into their system and how. Right. And so now they're just trying to, it's like, not finishing your antibiotics. You know what I mean? You think that you're well and you're trying to do business, but you still have, that infection. And even when it comes to certain standards, right? Because HIPAA is very clear in saying that anytime you don't have full control over the data, it's just assumed to be the worst, right? So there's no gray area with them. And so, a lot of times when you're working with companies where there's a compulsory requirement that they carry the coverage. What I think one of the missed opportunities is again, thinking through first party versus third party coverage, because oftentimes a company may just secure the bare minimum, especially in public entity. I could see where that's the thing. I have small companies that if they want to do business with the school system or the city, they have to produce a certificate, and there just has to be a box somewhere, and they think that they're done, and they're not kind of thinking through the bigger implications of what do I have to lose, not just what someone else is requiring that I carry. And so understanding all of the different coverage parts, and the ransomware thing kind of blew my mind, because to your point, I'm like, I'm not going to reward somebody for doing this. That's just going to, like you said, encourage them to go on and do it again. But sometimes that is the cheaper alternative, so that you can have full access to the data that you're locked out of. When you think about just even the inability, the lost revenue that you have when you don't have access to your data, there's so many implications. And I think that's the thing too, where it just becomes kind of overwhelming, where people are like, okay, I know there's a need, I hear all the horror stories. Is this just going to be gobs of money? How much coverage is enough? So if you had to kind of boil it down to kind of just the basic standard, what is the one thing that almost every company should consider adding on? Is it an endorsement? Is it a standalone, full-blown policy? Like, what would be the minimum requirement?
I would get a standalone policy personally. The minimum. So are you asking about one provision, basically, if
Yes.
they needed ransomware,
Okay.
extortion ransomware? Because if you get hit with ransomware and you cannot pay it, we're talking 7 figures for a lot of these payments. So if you don't have that provision in there, a lot of policies don't, especially the packaged ones. I feel like that makes a huge exposure. And then after that, forensics and legal. Forensics is very, very expensive. They're more expensive than me, which, it irks me, but that's okay. You'd want forensics in there because you need somebody who is very good at what they do, or laser focus. And you're going to the bad actors, right? So these forensic companies that are on the insurance panels, they've dealt with these attacks so many times. They know the due diligence that they need to do, but they cost a lot of money. It's truly how it is. So if you don't have that, that's a problem. Notification would be next. I lop legal in with forensics, because if you don't have the legal cost cover, usually they're going to go hand in hand. Notification. If you think about, if you only have coverage up to say 25,000 people, that's great. But what if you've got 100,000 notifications that are going to go out? Notification, credit monitoring, and call center costs then really add up really quickly. PR, obviously, as well. I'm kind of just going through those. I know I'm not giving you one, but the problem is it's hard to have one and not the others, right?
Agreed.
But if you're looking for one big one through any policy that you're looking at with your clients, it's ransomware, extortion. You need to make sure that that's there. If not, there's a huge vulnerability and a huge gap. Because you can bring in forensics and you can bring in me and legal, but we can't pay the ransomware for you. It's not, and if you don't have the money, it's not much we can do at that point, right? It's just they're gonna keep your system, keep your data, and maybe leak it.
So let me be a little bit more forgiving than Precious. I won't ask you for the top one. I'll ask you for the top 3. Okay, so if you had a choice of the top 3 kind of biggest bang for your buck, risk management protocols or practices that a company or an organization could put into place, what would be kind of those top 3 on your hit list, so that that cyber policy, the standalone cyber policy that you put in place, is less likely to have to respond, and so those attacks don't end up necessarily becoming breaches?
First one would be incident response plan, hands down. Once again, incident response plan, i.e. a plan to deal with a data breach, a team who's going to be responsible and testing it. This is incorporating basically legal and technical to make sure you understand the process for escalating versus not escalating, triggering versus not triggering. The second one would be vendor due diligence. Vendors are huge liabilities and vulnerabilities, as we talked about. And companies really need to take a hard look at who they're working with and start asking questions of, we're getting past like, well, we've worked with them for 10 years. We like them. That's great. Well, what due diligence have you done? Because once again, your clients aren't going to care if it started with them. So it's crafting that policy. And once again, it comes to that legal and the technical due diligence. The third one would be, to me, data disposal. That's kind of that's a big one for me. And I think it's almost underrepresented. If you think about how much data we have and the lack of policies in place that dictate when we should delete it. I mean, you can go back, I'm not going to name names, but there's someone I know within my family, maybe, that's got data going back like 10 years. Now it's great. It's on AO. It's the personal email, but I'm like, what are you doing here? Yeah. And, so it's just kind of understanding, well, when can we get rid of this legally? How long do we want to keep it? And how are we getting rid of it? Right. It's not just getting deleted. It's then making sure you're actually removing it. And then physical files. How are you getting rid of that? How long are you storing that? So those would be the three I think are the most important.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's interesting. So you hit on three where I think most people would think more of kind of like functional aspects of cyber, right? Like they would think of things along the lines of like, phishing training or kind of like rearranging for, and maybe this is included in kind of like your data treatment plan, I guess, but, arranging for those kind of like periodic cloud backups and things like that. But really, if you don't have the policies and procedures in place, you're kind of just burning money on the other stuff, because the policies and procedures make it so that you can really kind of, pick and choose the other services and training and things like that around it that complement the policies and procedures. Otherwise, you're just basically taking darts and throwing them at a dartboard, thinking that you're covered or you're protected from every angle. I think that's an awesome point. To your point, Precious, that the vendors that work with public sector entities, that's completely what it is, because there's almost like a conflict of interest or it's not a conflict of interest. I think it's just a quirk between, trying to get the most number of bidders as contractors to work with the public entity and making it as open as possible for like mom and pops as well as big firms to get these contracts. But at the same time, you're kind of cutting off your nose a little bit to spite your face, because you're, getting a little bit more laxed on the overall costs of what it takes to operate as one of those contractors. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's like the insurance requirements and things like that end up getting foregone. So I think one of the other things that I think you brought up, Spencer, was the sheer magnitude is completely underestimated of folks, right? And so like with that data disposal, do you find that people just have no possible way of, maybe they can't even like conceptualize it? Like I try not to get political, but like, when you talk about it, like $1 trillion in the federal budget, I don't think anyone can understand what $1 trillion is.
Yeah.
Like they have no concept of it.
Yeah.
I think when someone asks them, how many sensitive records do you have? Yeah. Some people will be like, 100, 200, and they have like 50,000. Like, is that always the case?
Always. I mean, it's basically explaining like, okay, how many gigabytes of data do you have? And they're like, wait, what's a gigabyte? And I'm like, okay, wait. So 2 gigs, got 3 gigabytes. I'm looking at a full length movie. I looked in your system. You've got 200 gigabytes, almost a terabyte. And that's all files and emails and records. And like, wait, what does that mean? And I'm like, that's about, I don't know, 2 million records, basically, we could be talking about. So it's hard to wrap your head around because you don't see it, right? It's not like my piece of paper, right? It's almost like going to a casino, right? You don't see your money, you just see your chips. Yeah. Great psychological game they play. Mm-hmm. But it's the same with data. You don't see it. So it's almost like out of sight, out of mind.
Because we don't have like a filing cabinet with like, how many folders are in there anymore?
Yeah,
like back in the day, you could be like, all the records are stored in that corner.
Yeah.
Like when you used to go to your doctor's office and they had that big rolling filing cabinet with the big, and you're like, oh, wow, all their patients are in there.
Yeah.
But everything's digital. So to your point, I think most people, their response is how many active customers, how many active files, how many, things that they've engaged with maybe over the last year, how many new sales or something. They're not thinking about that record retention. They're not thinking about that 3 years worth of stuff that they're holding on to that, when the hackers get into it, they're not going to say, oh, those are old accounts.
Yeah, they're not there anymore. They didn't actually work with them. We don't need to look at that. It's fine.
Right. I only count the ones that are paying me today. That's not how you count that,
No,
not how that works.
No, that doesn't work that way, but okay. No.
That's like in Bruce Almighty when Morgan Freeman opens up the filing cabinet.
Yeah.
It goes like a mile. Like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, looks can be deceiving.
Yeah.
But even the different types of customers, because, we talked about obviously healthcare accounts, they're a little bit more aware and savvy, consultants, I think, in order to do what they do. And again, these are things that we're starting to see become contractual requirements. And so those guys are kind of safe. But the everyday businesses, the HOAs, the things like that, to, Matt's point earlier, people are very dismissive. And they're like, oh, well, we get certs from everybody. I'm an additional insured here. They've got a policy. If something happens, I would just be, grandfathered into, and so trying to explain to them. So when I was asking for like the one to, maybe that was
they're not making me feel bad about this now.
Ambitious, but I'm kind of thinking about, again, especially in a down, turn in the economy, when people are facing the, what do you put back at the cash register effect. They know that you can't cut the auto, right? Yeah. You can't cut certain things. And so now, we're in a place where we're trying to really reinforce and justify, as accounts are coming up for renewal and people are looking for things to cut, sometimes the ones that they don't utilize or conceptualize as being most important are on the chopping block. And so, that's why I'm thinking through, for example, if someone just said, I just can't afford to keep the cyber policy anymore, and how do I scale it down versus get rid of it altogether? But obviously the ideal is just to resell and explain to them why all of this is necessary. You can't just put 11 eggs back. I need you to keep the carton intact.
Yeah.
But even in an environment where, a lot of our audience, the whole purpose of the live cast is how do you round out, how do you pivot to, because this is not just an additional revenue source, but this is, again, greater protection, for your customers, so that you don't, worst case scenario, face some sort of E&O exposure. Perhaps down the road, because they'll have a loss. And like, well, I just met with my broker a month ago and he told me that I was all good on all insurance, which, by the way, I don't recommend ever saying that ever. Yeah. I've never used the words, you have all the insurance you need.
You're good to go.
Right. You're all things, come what may. But yeah, we're trying to have more, meaningful engagement and explaining to them that this is an emerging risk. This is something that you may not have thought of seriously for the past couple of years, but this go round, this is an essential part of your, protection package. And so if you had to give just kind of the quick pitch to mom and pop business owner on why they need to consider this, what would that sound like?
Can you handle not doing business and not getting revenue for 4 weeks? If the answer is, yeah, we're fine. We got a lot of cash revenue saved up. Okay. Next question is, can you handle the reputational loss, of the brand damage? Most people are not going to say we'll be fine for a month. Because then the truth is, if your systems are down for a month, right, or out of commission, because the average length of these data breaches take a long time and hackers will sit there. So you lose a lot of income. Right. So then you start comparing, how much am I losing in a month versus how much am I going to pay in a premium? And I mean, from the premiums, when I'm looking at, I don't know, unless a mom and pop shop is really not bringing in any money, it just makes complete sense. The other part is reputational. Small businesses, if I go to my local tailor or I go to my local, I don't know, shoe shop, clother, whatever it is, it's because I know them and I trust them. But the second, and this goes to nonprofits, if you ever have a nonprofit client, nonprofits are the most vulnerable organizations out there, not by a legal liability, but a reputational one.
Absolutely.
So it's having those conversations, being like, how are you going to survive when all your client information and employee information gets leaked, right? And they all turn around to you and you haven't done anything, right? You didn't pay the, $1,000 premium or, $100 a month. That would have given that protection, right? That would have done the reputational repair. So I would say those are the two big questions. Well, actually, you could say three. Can you handle a month of not working and not getting revenue and not paying your employees? How are you handling reputational damage of talking to your clients and your employees in the government? And 3, how are you going to pay a ransom? Right? Do you have $1 million? Do you have $2 million offhand? Well, if not, you're losing all your systems. It's a scare tactic, but it's not meant to be a scare tactic, if that makes sense.
Oh no, that's okay, Spencer. I used to sell life insurance. Scary tactics. All right. I was also going to say a lot of the brokers out there, depending on what their client base looks like, they might also be concerned about, revenue this next year is going to drop after COVID, because even if we do kind of bounce back, your clients' revenues are going to be down. So GL premiums are going to be down. Payrolls might even be down. So work comp, commissions will be down. And some clients are shedding property, right? If they've moved their workforce to work from home, they're shedding property risk. So the one thing I would say is a good sales pitch to your clients, anyone who's listening, is, look, you're going to be saving money on these premium lines. Okay. Bank some of it, but also take some of it and bulk up the cyber coverage program that you have in place, or put one in place if you don't already have one, because this has been a trend that has kind of it's already been around, but COVID kind of accelerated this trend of decentralization, work from home, more kind of I'll call it like disconnected or indirectly connected IT infrastructure, bring your own device policies at work and stuff like that. All of this is kind of like, poured gasoline on the fire. I would definitely have that conversation with clients in terms of, kind of reallocating some of that, I'll use air quotes, savings, in premium that they're going to experience this next year. The last question I have for you, Spencer, is really kind of from the standpoint of, more IT infrastructure. A ton of VPN companies are advertising like nuts because of, work from home and things like that. Is that a pretty secure solution in terms of, installing a VPN portal to get in, or are there other routes that, or maybe things that, firms should be adding on to that VPN that make them a little bit more secure?
I think VPNs are a really good and cost-effective way to protect yourselves. Because if you think about it, when you log in from your personal network, it's your personal network. It's not going to be as secure. I mean, I hope your password's not password, but a lot of passwords are password. But you get the VPN, you're literally logging in from your company system, which is going to be more sophisticated. Other ways companies could do this would be multi-factor authentication. Very annoying, but it's very good. Because obviously when you try to log in, say for Apple, you log in from a new device, it makes you verify like twice. The other thing is password vaults. I use Keeper Vault religiously because that will give you long passwords, but the only password you have to remember is your master password. But don't lose your master password. That's just not a fun. Trust me from experience, that is not a fun time. But those 3 things, I mean, those are multi-factor authentication is going to be a little bit more expensive, but not extremely expensive. I would VPN, Keeper Vault, or some kind of password management where you can, get those longer passwords, and then the multi-factor authentication.
Awesome. So I will definitely say, one of the things that obviously we don't like to talk much about or think much about in this day and age is offboarding. When you have someone resign or goodness forbid, you have to terminate someone, if you don't have some of these VPN or access that you can disable, it's not like before where someone walks you out. Someone's not going to walk you out of your living room, So, these are things that we have to think about in terms of in this environment with remote work and things like that, having a plan for onboarding, for offboarding, like you said, for the annual training or, however frequently you do some of the training that's done. Now there's all sort of vendors and things that have online, kind of prepackaged boilerplate stuff. We talked a little bit earlier about having processes and procedures and things like that. Do you feel like some of the boilerplate processes are sufficient, or do you suggest that someone, kind of come in and do a manuscript one according to their specific makeup?
I hate boilerplate policies. I hate Googling.
That's
and
a
then
very
you find
attorney
one.
answer, by the way. But
Yeah,
okay.
it is. It is. I mean, it's self-serving. I get that, but I see these policies, procedures, and protocols, and literally, I could take it and just Google it, and I'm like, well, one, do you even follow this? Do you know what this means? Are you enforcing this? Because you have a provision that says you're going to enforce it by X sanctions. Because if this is basically a legal contract between you, your clients, employees, and the government. I think you can get like almost an outline of it, but you got to get to the nitty gritty about your company. Because one, you don't want to overextend, right? Where you're having all these obligations, but you're not doing it. But you also don't want to underperform where you're only saying, we care about data, we'll take care of it, and we're going to cut employee access off, right? Because
we've all seen those employee manuals, and it's literally like relegated to a paragraph.
Yeah.
And it just basically says everything you do on company time is subject to, oversight, and that's it. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's the full extent that it's addressed. And so, here we go with the varying degrees of stuff. Boilerplate's better than nothing. Because you have a lot of people who are existing with nothing in place. But obviously, best case scenario is to have it reviewed, have it customized and tailored, and preferably to, reach out to someone like you for help with something like that. So,
it doesn't have to be intense, right? You don't need, I preach about not getting too intense with these things because you want it streamlined. And you're right, boilerplate is fine as long as you understand what's in it and as long as you're following it. I get so scared about a boilerplate. It's almost like LegalZoom. LegalZoom, it's fine for what it is. I'm not doing any defamation here. But it's like you get a document, you just make sure you know what's in it and make sure you're following what's in it. Because the second you write it down is like, that's where you get nipped. So I like boilerplate's fine as long as you're abiding by it.
Hey, showing my age a little bit. LegalZoom is better than back in the day when you used to go to like Office Depot.
No, I'm not hating on it. It's a lovely business model, so it's fine. It's good, but
to your point, I think that there's a lot to be said about that. Just like anything, just like with policies, you have to understand, read the policy, understand the verbiage, understand, and of course, a lot of those assign roles to people. Do you even have who's serving those roles?
Exactly.
Instead of just Control F and insert company name everywhere.
You get to that one part that you didn't do it. It just says corporation.
Because it'll refer to like a CIO, and you're like, we have one of those. Who's that? I haven't met him yet.
No, I didn't know that. That's good.
Good stuff. Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that again, as we think through how do we continue to stay relevant and valuable and secure that position as the trusted advisor for our customers, because agents are a dime a dozen. Advisors are few and far between, and that's really kind of what makes the difference, is being knowledgeable so that you can bring them up to speed on all the things that they're not even aware are out there that loom, in the dark corners.
That's right. That's right.
So again, shameless plug. So the Dallas chapter for the CPCU Society, we do have a 1 hour cyber CE that we're hosting for free later this month. So more opportunities to plug in, get familiar with this stuff so that we can go out and continue to preach the good word to those around us on why it's necessary. Spencer, of course, I thank you so much for accepting the invite. I plugged you into some other places as well, so hopefully they followed up, and I've already heard some good feedback of people who are excited to talk to you. And Matthew, I guess, are we going to have his contact info? I think it was already on the invite as well, but a reminder.
I'll throw it in the description once this goes up on YouTube. But Spencer, if anyone kind of wants to find out more about you or connect or find out more about Niles, Barton, and Wilmer, where can they go to find that information?
Well, feel free to call me. I mean, we have a 24/7 breach hotline, but I also use that as kind of a free consultation. That's 443-381-3586. Email me, sspolick, that's POLLOCK @nilesbarton.com, or go check out the website, nilesbarton.com, and we've got the data security, cybersecurity page. And thank you. Awesome. Thank you both. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. This is like, I'm glad. Hopefully, that's a company line and not like your cell phone. And
No, it's not. Trust me. it becomes whoever's on call. That's who it goes
Yeah.
to, no matter the time. So please try not to call me at 3 a.m. just to have a chat. If you have a but if you want to have a chat, maybe like, give me like some 7 to like, I don't know, 6, because the alarm that when that goes off, it's like an alarm. So
Spencer, Precious will tell you that I definitely have this theory that the best conversations happen after midnight. So, but I'll try and stop that from making me call the hotline.
Hey, call the
anytime
hotline
after.
whenever. You guys have free passes. Anyone call the hotline whenever. But if it's after midnight, I'm not going to be. I'll be thrilled. I will always be thrilled. But just probably in my mind, I will be like, "What is going on right now?"
Yeah. Well, I thank you. I appreciate it. Look, we'll have to have you on again sometime because I'm sure there's way more that we can dig into this and maybe even look at some like case studies and things like that in the future. But I appreciate it very much. And a reminder to everyone, regardless of how you're watching this, every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, we're coming at you with another episode of Sell Like a CPCU. So Spencer, I appreciate it. Everyone have a good evening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank
All
you
right,
guys.
guys. Be good.
Appreciate it. See ya.
Thank you.